Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We are joined today by Jurij Kofner, an economist and economic policy advisor for Alternative for Deutschland, or AfD, which is now the largest party in Germany in terms of the polls. So welcome back and congratulations on your political successes.
Thanks, Glenn, for having me again. And yes, we are happy, but it's still a long wait that we have to fight. You can see from Austria, where the FPÖ has been leading the polls for 2 years now, if I guess rightly, and they have won the elections first place. They still were not allowed by the establishment to rule. So, but we will do our best and we will keep fighting. But we are on the way.
Well, for the past decade, though, we see that Europe has been going through very severe socio-economic as well as security problems, which translates now into legitimacy crisis in the political system, as you suggested. Trying to keep out the party which people actually want is, of course, one of these problems. Now, your political party, the AfD, they were only established, if I'm not mistaken, in 2013. Yet last week, Politico reported that AfD is now the most popular party in the country. Of course, they describe it as far right, which means you can't say anything nice about them. Yet the response, though, appears to have been to criminalize and possibly even seeking to ban the party. And this is not only, of course, in Germany. We see similar concerning developments in other parts of Europe as well. But I want to get your perspective on the causes of this development, but also how you believe we can reverse the decline. Um, I guess my first question towards this wider goal is how do you assess the economic challenges in Germany and I guess in wider Europe? Because in the early 2000s, I read books and articles arguing that this would be the century of Europe. But instead, it seems that we are entering the century of humiliation. So, how can you explain what has happened?
Yes. I guess those books were influenced by Francis Fukuyama and his thoughts on the victory of globalism and liberalism, and Europe as the alleged defender of those values, should float on top. I guess this was the mindset at that time, and it still is, unfortunately. So first of all, the situation economically, but also socially, is deplorable in Germany, but also in wider Europe. In Germany, we see a full-scale deindustrialization, which we haven't seen, to be quite frank, and I'm not overstating this, more drastic deindustrialization than we have seen during the bombings of Germany in World War II. Because if you look at the numbers of engineers, of industrial workforce being unemployed, which go into the hundreds of thousands in the recent years, like in the past 3 years. If you look in the numbers of industrial manufacturing being shut down, so we have, for example, industrial production is now 25% or even more below what it should be if you extrapolate trends up until 2018, 2019. If you look at German GDP, for example, you see if you extrapolate the trend, we have seen a recession, a stagnation since 2019, and we are below, like 20% below trend. Germany has not grown since 2019, and I could go on and on. In every sphere, everywhere it's the same. In Europe, it's bad as well, but not as bad as in Germany. And but what we can see for Europe is that Europe doesn't matter anymore, neither politically, as we have seen, or geostrategically, as we have seen with the meeting between Trump and Putin in Alaska just recently, and how the European leaders, if you can call them like that, were summoned to Washington a few days later. How they sat and noted what Trump had to tell them about the meeting, which is very symbolic. And this is the whole image for the whole of the European Union, because European Union has not been able to create large industrial, high-tech, digital corporations as the United States has. So every large major power has something they can rely on. Russia obviously has a sophisticated, strong army energy resources, and so on. Also, some few large high-tech corporations, space exploring, and so on. China obviously has major large corporations, a large power base, industrial base. United States has the big tech, the high tech, the artificial intelligence now, big platforms. What does Europe have? Europe doesn't have any more major high value corporations. And the reason for all of this, especially in Germany, but also in Europe to a lesser extent, is I think a mix of uh, liberal ideology, which maybe thought that there will be no more great power struggle, no more geopolitics. So going back to Francis Fukuyama, if we just keep on pretending that there is no real policy, real politics, then everything will be fine. And also, of course, it is to even a larger extent, it is this ideological drive towards a green economy, which is in itself, I guess, based on one part on a mentality of being in an ivory tower. If you ever have been to European Commission or to the European Parliament, you know what I mean. They are living not in idea, but in fact, if you look at their offices, they live in an ivory tower. They do not feel what it feels to live as a industrial worker in Western Germany or a farmer in Romania. They have no idea about that. And also this liberal left-wing ideological drive to transform the economy. So it's a neo-Marxist ideology, a new agenda. They have perceived that they have to save the climate, whatever that means. They have to save the planet at any cost. And the cost, obviously, is the European economic power, or what was left of it. So industrial output and so on. The last wealth. And of course, a major blow was given to the European economy, to European stability societies through mass immigration. And also, which is paired or comes upon the fact that we have seen a fertility crisis in the past years. So the autochthonous native Europeans are literally dying out. We have a birth rate of about 1.3, 1.5, depending on which nation. And which is interesting, you see it across the board. You see it across very liberal, globalist, individualist nations such as Germany or England, and you see it also in very countries where you have actually should think of they should have very effective. They have a very pronatalist pro-family policy. Hungary, Poland, for example. And if you look at the numbers, still it's the same. They have a fertility rate of about 1.5. So it is more a mental of a societal issue than a policy issue or of giving economic incentives. So this conglomeration of those factors is like a perfect storm for the European Union. And just to maybe top it off with the how you say icing on the cake is of course the war in Ukraine, where billions and billions of taxpayer money is being channeled towards through the US American armaments industry. Because what is happening, and Trump is very open about this, Europeans have to pay for buying American tanks, American drones, and so on, which is being shipped to Ukraine. And so obviously the armaments industry is benefiting, largely the American one, but obviously it's harming the taxpayers. And if you look at the recent decisions made in the European Commission, for example, 850 billion euros for it was called Rearm Europe. Now they have relabeled it into Resilient Europe, if I'm right, because the European Union is big on labeling bad things, awful things in good names. 850 billion, which is more than the Corona fund, the Next Generation EU, another nameplay, of course, or an euphemistic definition again they used, which was 750, now is about 810. But what I'm saying is it's not possible to bear all these costs. So my prediction is in the future, we will see major shifts in the European policy and maybe even a dissolution of the European Union.
Well, in the 19th century, it began with the United States, with the American system. Then it spread to France, Germany, Russia. The idea of, we refer to it now as technological sovereignty, the idea that you need to have some industrial autonomy, your own manufacturing base, in order to be able to enjoy full political autonomy. Now, in these days, as you suggested, it's the digitalization of industries, which is very important. Now, we see in Germany, it kind of makes sense why the energy-intensive heavy industry has been struggling, from infrastructure to skilled labor costs, but of course the energy access to Russia is a big issue. But besides these traditional industries, how do you explain why Europe hasn't been able to develop these high-tech digital platforms to effectively have some autonomous digital ecosystem? And again, one would point to Germany, because if Europe was aspiring to have this, I kind of assume that the Germans would have to take the lead. I'm not sure, I'm not sure where else it would come from, perhaps Britain. But if we now look at the top 20 digital websites in the world visited, we see that only one is European, and that's Yandex, which is a Russian company. So how do we explain the failure of Europe to actually digitalize and get some digital sovereignty? Because again, from my perspective, all industries are now being reshaped by this new digital technologies. The big digital platforms, which only did communication technologies, they're now going into all physical industries, things which usually belong to the physical world. So this is a huge problem. Why can't Europe get on board with this?
Before I answer this distinct question, let me just go one step back again, because I think you touched a very important issue here. I guess that the future will be defined by three factors: energy costs, technology, meaning digital technology and artificial intelligence, and demographics. And Germany, Europe has lost all of those three issues. If you look at energy, since the 1970s, cheap Russian gas was one of the foundations of German industrial growth, and also to a larger extent of the European Union. Now we have cut ourselves off by ourselves, by European sanctions. And Germany, maybe just an interesting anecdote on that fact. So when in 2022, January, just before the war started, German politicians were very loud, criticizing the large dependence of the German economy on Russian gas, which might be true to an extent. I would go as far to say that, which was about 40% of total German gas imports. Nowadays, 45% of total German gas imports comes from the United States in the form of liquefied natural gas, which is thrice as expensive as Russian gas. And 95% of all liquefied natural gas going to Germany is from the United States. You don't hear a single politician of the established parties criticizing this matter of fact, which again shows the kind of Vasality mentality that they still have in their heads, I guess. And so Germany has one of the highest energy costs in the world, and that's one of the major reasons why we are deindustrializing. It just doesn't make any more sense to produce in Germany. And the tariffs now imposed by Trump of 15%, they're just adding something on top on this difficulty, but they're not the main factor. The main factor is, for example, high energy costs, high taxes, not enough skilled labor, bureaucracy. Okay, so concerning the digital platforms, digital companies, AI, and so on, I think there are also, again, there's not one single factor which we should blame on why Europe has fallen back or hasn't produced anything of meaning. One major factor, obviously, is of course that Europe is a vassal of the United States, and the United States, which we can see very clearly with the behavior of the now new administration in the White House: Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, the new tech right, as they are called. They are all our allies. With us, I mean, of course, the German or the European conservatives, right-wing people mindset. They're our allies in the culture war, fighting leftism, cultural Marxism, and so on, fighting transgenderism, LGBT propaganda, also maybe green ideology. All good and fine, but when it comes to economic interests, they are not our friends. They're business partners. They are pursuing their own national interests, and you can see it with big tech. For example, when now European Union has or plans to introduce in part two major digital acts, the EU Digital Markets Act and the EU AI Act. And as part of the negotiations between Trump and Ursula von der Leyen, this tariff deal, there have been ongoing negotiations in exempting American tech companies, big tech, big platforms from all of those regulations. So when we have a situation where 95% of all digital platforms, of all digital services used by Europeans are American platforms, exempting those platforms from all those regulations don't make any sense. They're not useful. I'm not even now going into the issue of if they were right or wrong in the regulation. I think they were partly wrong to a larger extent. There were some useful moments in them, but basically they were hindering our own business, especially with bureaucracy, with certification and so on, which is again just sand in our economy, which is also a factor which hinders us from growing our own big tech. But this is one major factor, obviously. So the vasality of Europe from the United States and the Americans not allowing us to have our own big tech companies. But also, apart from that, it is also the disability of, not for giving the example again of Germany, for creating an ecosystem of raising up people who are willing and capable of building up those big tech startups. So one major issue is education. So how has the United States solved the problem? The United States has solved the problem of finding those highly talented engineers, programmers, and so on by sucking them up from all over the world. Indian IT people from Russia, from Europe, from all over the world. They have been drafted into Silicon Valley. Some of them have come from the United States, but most of them have come from abroad. They have cherry-picked the best engineers and so on. Germany, for example, if you go to a German school, when you have an IT class, you do have IT classes. What you learn is how to make a PowerPoint presentation, so which is outdated last century, basically. And every young person, if he wants to do a PowerPoint presentation, he will find out very quickly. He will actually be more efficient in using a certain TikTok apps and how to cut videos than how to make PowerPoint presentations. So what is needed, obviously, is to have programming lessons in as part of your education, to learn a programming language like Python or C++ or something like that. Even as soon as you learn English or another foreign language, you should learn programming. In the Russian Federation, for example, it's everywhere now. In every basic school, there are options to learn programming because this is the new language of the future. It's even more important than to learn a foreign language because nowadays you can just put a computer in your ear and it will translate Chinese into English or into Russian and so on. So more important is to learn the programming of that program you will have in your ear. So we are not educating skilled labor in Europe or in Germany for the economy of the future. So basic things which a government should provide. And the third major factor is obviously the whole thing around it. Apart from that is high taxes, high bureaucracy. You don't have this, I said that already, the skilled labor, high energy costs. How can you have high-tech artificial intelligence companies in Germany if electricity prices are about 50 cents per kilowatt hour? You cannot have the programming centers. You cannot have the cloud services located in Germany because it's just too expensive. Now, for example, they have now introduced in 2023 a so-called energy efficiency law in Germany, Germans always like to introduce European regulations earlier than the European Union itself. It's a part, unfortunately, of this famous German mentality to be very forward, very, how do you say, to realize demands ahead of what is actually demanded from you. The European Union will now introduce this regulation in a few years. Germany already has this regulation, and as part of this regulation, digital programming centers now have to be eco-friendly, climate-friendly, which obviously drives up the costs by a factor of 2. So obviously, no big tech company in their right mind would build such a programming center in Germany. They will do it in the United States or anywhere where the electricity is cheap. So again, a conglomeration of all those factors are hindering the German or the European economy to create startups, unicorns, and in the future, big tech companies.
Yeah, I think if you look to China as the main now pushing this new technologies, which requires these powerful data centers, they actually have now declining energy prices because they're pushing essentially all branches of energy. They're building out everything quite aggressively. So uh, they will have a huge competitive advantage, not just over Europeans, but the Americans as well. Uh, you mentioned what governments can do. I often like the example of South Korea because until the 1960s, they were always training people, educating them, but the good guys were always going to the United States to work. So just training workers for skilled labor for the Americans. But what the government could do, though, is help to build domestic platforms, which could, well, not digital, but platforms to absorb the electric workers, the different engineers into, national companies, similar to what the Japanese were doing. And this was kind of how a country could make sure that it would build its own technological sovereignty and prevent simply all the good guys from leaving to the United States.
Yes, if I may just add an example, in Russia, when it noticed, the Russian government noticed that a lot of IT specialists were leaving Russia in the aftermath of the start of the war in Ukraine, they offered a lot of incentives for Russian IT specialists to return back to Europe, to Russia. And for example, if you would return to Russia, you would receive uh, uh, if a uh, if a loan on buying a house without any interest, an interest-free loan, and other perks, tax-free income for a certain period, and so on. And it worked. And a lot of and I know it myself from personal experience. People talking with Russians who came to Germany, they had this image of Germany of being this country which they were told about in the 90s, which was still a very attractive country at that time. And then they see the mass immigration, they see everything deteriorating. You're not able to receive an appointment with the doctors. And they were more than glad to go back to Russia. So I guess more than half of those people which have left, of the IT people, 200,000, they have come back to Russia by 2023. So that's just an example. And so you're absolutely right. If a government should be introducing policies to incentivize the creation of sovereign national business entities which are able to produce added value in the future. And one of the major factors is cheap energy. There's a famous study by a Swedish university which shows that there is no developed industrial nation in the world which doesn't have cheap energy. There are none. There haven't been in the last century. So this idea that, oh, we will design iPhones and not have cheap electricity because that will produce somewhere abroad, that's just not true. So the major factors of the future economy are energy, technology, artificial intelligence, and of course, skilled labor demographics. If I may just add, since the beginning of the chancellorship of Angela Merkel in Germany, 2005, up until now, over 1 million Germans have net left Germany. So they have emigrated to Germany, 1 million, than they have come back. And those are I've seen the data, 85% of them are highly skilled labor, in perfect working age, and they are leaving because they just had enough. They know that they will earn more net abroad in Switzerland or even in the UK or in the United States. A lot of them even are going to Hungary and Russia, and that they will not face those problems we're facing now in Germany with unsafe streets and anti-family policy and so on. So all those factors together are making us incompetitive.
Well, as you suggest, one of the factors seemingly in Europe's decline is also the relationship with the United States hasn't really been, well, let's say, reconceptualized. That is, for political realists, we like to say that there's no permanent allies, there's only permanent interests. But often when people in Europe look towards the United States, said, well, it's a long relationship since World War II. It's important to maintain this, but after the Second World War, the United States had great incentives to have really generous trade policies with the Europeans. And indeed, this was something they discussed in Washington, that yes, this is a cost, but being very generous with the trade agreements with Europeans, it was to have to make sure that the West Germany was good, the good Germany as opposed to East Germany, to make sure that South Korea was a good Korea as opposed to North Korea, that Taiwan was the good China as opposed to continental China. But the world is different. That they don't have the capacity anymore. Now that the world is becoming more multipolar, you see the US has less to offer the Europeans, and they demand more because they would demand loyalty. So don't trade with the Russians, Chinese. Why aren't you going after the Indians? So, and also join our sanctions on the Iranians. So they demand more, they offer less. But even as the Europeans now seem to struggle to get the love of Washington, Washington doesn't even want to be in Europe. They say very openly, our priority is now to pivot to Asia. Yet I'd noticed now in other parts of the world, be it Japan, South Korea, they're now openly discussing, we made ourselves too dependent on the United States. And at the moment, the US is not in a generous position. They're going to have to extract more. They want to take their resources, take the industries, bring it back to the United States, as they told the Taiwanese, by the way. While in Europe, they still try to win over the love of the Americans, calling Trump daddy. And you mentioned the scenes now at the Oval Office, but behind the scenes, though, do you see anything happening? Is there any pushback? It's essentially saying, listen, the distribution of power is different. The world is different. We have to adjust to these realities in order to act in the interest of the European nation states.
Yes. So yes, indeed. What I'm seeing when I'm listening to debates in, be it the Bundestag at the federal level or at the state level in Bavaria, where also advice on economic policy, something very astonishing from my experience happened is that politicians from the CDU-CSU, so the Conservative Party, or let's call them conservatives in name only, which have been always very transatlanticist, and always they have used every opportunity to call us Putinists and Chinese collaborators and whatever, because we, as the AfD, we
And the huggers, I think they
yes,
I see there.
so indeed, they have called us like that because we are arguing, as you have said, in favor of multipolarity and having alternatives and having good relations to other major powers as well, because that is in the interest of the German peoples and German economy. And of course, they have labeled us as traitors and so on, which is just absurd, because we are the most patriotic party. In effect, yeah, it's just. And what I was astonished by, that even in their speeches now, after Trump became second time president of the United States, they have used words and tones of, are they leftists? Are they have become AfD people? Because they have become very anti-American in their speeches. So I'm not sure if that is very genuine. Of course, that the tone would change very quickly if Democrats would rule again in Washington. But I think there's something has changed a little bit. Something has cracked in the minds of many of those people who were raised very transatlantic. You shouldn't forget that if you look at all the major news outlets in Germany, if you look at all the big companies, if you look at all the established parties, all of the leaders of those people, and I'm not overstating or overemphasizing or being too populist about this. they are all raised in what's called young leaders programs. So programs by pro-American think tanks, and they're being raised as being pro-American. It's a mindset issue, and I think this is starting to crack a little bit in Germany and in Europe, and this is something good, I guess, something good which is happening, because they also those politicians were very confused how to label us now. So are we Putinists or are we Trumpists? Because, Elon Musk said only AfD can save Germany, and Trump and Vance were speaking in favor of us, and Marco Rubio. So doesn't compute basically for them. So something has cracked in their mindset. And how this will proceed, if this seed maybe in the mind will grow, I hope so, at least. So that it can build a foundation for a new generation which will be more minded towards national or European interests. If I may just add maybe some background again, the thing is, Donald Trump, of course, rightly argues that tariffs have since the 80s have been in favor of the European Union or the European community. Europe had much higher tariffs than the United States. So Europeans exported a lot of goods to the United States. But then again, the other thing which he doesn't mention is that all the dollars that we have received, the European governments or the European companies, and transferred through the banking sector, we have bought United States bonds, federal bonds by United States. So this export surplus has been financing the huge, massive national debt of the United States. United States, since the 1980s and before that, they have been able to export inflation and export debt, because we have been recycling all their federal bonds. And the thing is now, what is happening is, as you have rightly said, the United States cannot afford it anymore, because they have lived in this kind of structure which they have to build up. Government debt, globalization, producing abroad, but having all the value being brought back to the United States. This kind of policy is broken now, because especially if you look at cities like Detroit or Ohio, where J.D. Vance is from, they want to bring back industry to those regions, because the people are broken there through alcoholism, through drugs, because of this globalist outsourcing policy. But if you bring back all the production to the United States, which of course is not only a social matter, but also a matter of national sovereignty, of defense issues, of security issues, and so on, then you have to put up tariffs, what he did. But then what the Europeans do, they will export less to the United States, but they are less able to buy American securities. And then who will finance the American debt? And that is a major issue for Trump now. And if you have read the economists advising Donald Trump, one famous economist, Stephen Moran, his chief economist, for example, they have outlined their plan a long time ago. Well, not long time ago, in November 24. The idea is the next step. So first step has already been implemented: tariffs, high tariffs, to reindustrialize the United States, to get tariff revenue. Part two is to force Europeans, but not only Europeans, also the other Asian allies, as they would call them, vassals, as I would call them, Japan, South Korea, and so on, to buy American energy, to force us to invest into the United States. This has also happened. This is part of this agreement in Scotland, to buy American armaments, obviously, $100 billion, which was already planned even before the deal. If you remember what the European leaders were saying, that we will be buying American armaments. And the fourth part, which I predict will happen in the near future now, is that what Stephen Moran wrote in his paper is the so-called Mar-a-Lago Accord, which doesn't exist yet. It will come into force probably. Is Mar-a-Lago obviously being the private hotel or private villas by Donald Trump in Florida, which is called after the Plaza Accords, which was a deal between the United States and Japan and the European countries on devaluing their currencies, devaluing the dollar against the European currencies. And the same deal will be struck in the future. I predict now. So prediction is always a bad thing, but if they all write about it, I think something like that will come into effect. So they will ask or force the Europeans to buy so-called century bills, century bonds by the United States. So basically they will force us to buy American bonds, but which will be paid back not within 3 years or 10 years, but in 100 years. That's why they're called century bonds. So they have, with that, if they achieve that, they have achieved complete vasality, because we buy American, we pay high revenues, we buy American armament, we buy American energy, we invest in the United States, and we finance the government debt, which will be paid back maybe sometime in 100 years. We don't know. We are of that. So this is absolute vasality, and I think in a kind of thorough matter, in this kind of shape, we haven't seen it in history yet. So we will see, but I think this will happen. We will see this kind of agreement in the near future.
This is this is so incredible that there's no political imagination to envision a policy different than this complete subordination. But this is a curious thing with Europeans, though, because either they have to blindly follow the United States or be anti-American and hate America. I mean, I like America. I think the Americans, they have an important economy. We have a strong civilizational connection. We should get along, but I would still urge for our own independence and autonomy to diversify our partnerships and, of course, have some
Yes.
dignity at least. But with the US, it's very strange because the European leaders, they really hate, not just leaders, the media, everyone hates Trump, but they can't wait fast enough to again outsource basic governance and our economies to the United States. I just have one last question on the economic issue, though, which is the Chancellor Merz. He recently expressed the desire for Germany to become a military leader in Europe, and he also linked this to economic growth, a form of military Keynesianism. So instead of making cars and heavy industry, let's just build weapons instead. And this kind of should take care of the confrontation with Russia, but also rebuild the German industries. That being said, now that all the weapons are being bought from America, what happens to these huge spending plans of Merz and his goals of building a powerful European or German military industry?
Well, you shouldn't forget that Friedrich Merz was the head of BlackRock before he became chancellor of BlackRock Germany. BlackRock obviously being one of the largest financial corporations in the world with a net value larger than many countries' GDP. BlackRock owns about 12% of the DAX, so the German stock exchange companies, 40 largest German companies. Together with Vanguard Group and other American funds, they own about, depends how you count, 40 to 60% of the largest German corporations. So that is another aspect of us being a vassal of the United States. So what we see in Germany, instead of tackling the real issues for creating government growth, and they're quite simple, to be honest, is to have cheap energy, stopping the energy turnaround, returning to nuclear power, cheap gas, be it from Russia or other sources. Then, of course, lowering taxes, just as Donald Trump is doing in the United States. For example, the carbon pricing, we should abolish it, which makes everything more expensive. Then, of course, all the bureaucracy monsters, be it the energy efficiency law, be it the ban on combustion engines, which is destroying our automobile industry, be it the so-called supply chain laws, and so on and so on. Bureaucracy, red tape, which is killing our economy, even more so than taxes, I would argue. And of course, the skilled labor shortage with mass immigration of unskilled labor, miserable education system by itself, people, children not learning anything anymore of value, no mint technology and so on, mathematics, engineering. All those sectors combined is killing our economy, killing our economic growth, and not allowing us to grow. So to just tackle those four issues would mean would basically mean to have a new economic wonder, as we would have in the 50s and 60s. It's quite simple. But instead of doing that, they only matter. I don't know if it's purely ideology. I wouldn't say so. It's partly ideology, Keynesianism, left-wing mindset that every problem has to be solved with just pouring tons and tons of money into it. Green transformation, armament being financed by huge debt. So if you have followed a little bit the discussions in Germany, there was basically a financial coup d'etat in Germany because the chancellor, before even the elections were, the last seconds of the last government, they organized a majority in the German parliament, which was not elected anymore. So the new parliament was elected, but they didn't call in the new parliament with new majorities. They wouldn't be able to change the constitution to issue this allowance on canceling the debt break and getting this new debt allowance for the government. They used the old parliament, and of that they got a majority, which is basically a coup d'etat. It was against the constitution, basically, but they did it anyway. Merz was the leader of this. He wasn't even a chancellor at that time. And now Germany has issued a new debt of 850 billion euros, which is more debt in a single year, or basically in the next 4 years, than we had since the foundation of the Federal Republic of Germany in 1949. Just imagine the huge scale of the debt we are incurring now. So having said all of this, who will benefit from that? And I think obviously a large benefactor of this is BlackRock, because it doesn't matter if the funding will go, if the contracts will go to German armament companies like Rheinmetall or Helsing or something of them, or American, because they're all partly owned by BlackRock or Vanguard Group. But obviously a large part will go to the American armament companies. But a few, I don't know, maybe 15, 20%, even 30%, doesn't matter, will go to German armament companies. And then they will have new contracts and new funding. And we see that, and it's very tragic, comic to see this kind of cycle in our history, because Porsche, which makes very nice cars, a very famous company, they started out as manufacturing tanks. Then they have produced those nice racing cars. Now they're again saying it doesn't make sense for us to produce nice cars with an internal combustion engine. No one wants to drive a nice car with an electric battery. Everyone wants to have the sound and the feeling of having an internal combustion engine. So it doesn't make sense for us. People don't want to buy it. So we will produce tanks again. That's basically what they said recently in their new statement. And we see that with all other German car manufacturing companies and so on. So it's very sad, and I'm not able to tell you where this will lead us. Maybe just some positive notes, maybe. Some good aspects which I see. I see that the German population is not willing to go to war. So if they will try to send, as Merz has said now, send German soldiers to Ukraine, the majority of the German population is against sending German troops abroad, sending them to Ukraine. We don't want a war with Russia. And also, and maybe unfortunately, a beneficial factor on rearmament in Germany is that the issues which I have said, yes, you can pour billions and billions of euros into the German nascent resurging armament industry, but they will still not be able to manufacture properly because due to high energy costs, due to red tape, due to high taxes, due to skilled labor shortage. You can't have Syrians and Afghans working in large tank plants and factories. It's just impossible, with the highest electricity costs and gas costs in the world. So maybe this will be hindering the rearmament of Germany. And hopefully by 2029, when the next elections will take place, or earlier than that, we will have this high burden of taxes, of debt, of energy costs. The sheer insanity of it all will make the Germans vote now an AfD government, and then we will hopefully be able to stop this insanity.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of skilled labor has been leaving Germany while unskilled labor has been entering. It's now 10 years ago since Angela Merkel said, wir schaffen das, or I apologize for the poor German, but yeah, we can do this.
Yes.
So we can handle this, this million people coming into the country. But I guess in retrospect, if Germany had handled it, I guess they would be declaring success now. It's are any of these ideas or assertions or policies being reversed?
So I want to be quite frank with this. The opening of the German borders for those illegal migrants was treason, was illegal according to our constitution, and was the biggest attack on Germany since 1945. The problems caused by mass immigration are so massive that even the industrialization or all the factors are just pale in comparison. Now we have over 5 to 6 million people have come to Germany. We have 3.4, 3.5 of million people are from the asylum countries, partially also from Ukraine. We have seen a reduction in the autochthonous ethnic German population since the 1960s. So we are now at about 75% and less, 70% are ethnic Germans. The rest are all foreigners which have come to Germany. Obviously, many of them have integrated. I'm not saying all of them haven't integrated, but some of them have become German. Obviously, if they're culturally newer to us, if they are other Europeans, Americans, they have integrated well and they're paying the taxes. They're working hard, which is interesting. We have no problem economically, socially, or in the sense of security with people coming from Eastern Asia or India. No problem at all. The highest earning people in Germany are Indians, basically, by the way. But the people coming from Africa and the Near East, they have contributed. I'm not talking about individuals, to be very clear about this. So there are exceptions, obviously, yeah. But if you look at statistics, and that's what economists tend to do, there has been nearly no benefit for the German economy, for the German society from mass immigration. Since 2015, there has been only net costs. So and we were lied to. We were lied to that those people will solve a problem of skilled labor shortages. They will pay our rent. They will, our pension. They will pay our pensions for the Germans which are getting older. There will be a boon to our economy. So just to go through step by step quickly to look at what is really happening. In 2014, I saw this, the Bundesagentur für Arbeit, so the German agency for labor. They have said in 2014 that there are some issues with certain branches of the economy where there is not enough skilled labor, but basically across the board there is no skilled labor shortage. 2014, 2025, we have about 500 to 600,000 people, skilled labor missing. We cannot fill those jobs. We don't have it. We cannot build an IT economy. We cannot build up industrial base. We don't have those people, basically, because they have left Germany. They're basically, most of them, again, they're ethnic Germans which have left Germany. More than 1 million people have left. If they wouldn't have left, you wouldn't have that problem. Instead of that, we have now in the social security program, the so-called Bürgergeld. So you get 460 euros per month per person, and you get also your rent paid by the government. 50% of all the money paid out goes to foreigners now, according to statistics, while foreigners being only 14% of the population. 14% of the population are foreigners. 50% receive social security. 25% are people with immigration background, so partially having German passports. 65% of all the people receiving social security are people with an immigration background. So if you know from the United States, where you have the problem that low-skilled labor from Mexico is taking away low-skilled labor in the United States, working at McDonald's, cleaning, and so on, and they have this issue there. In Germany, we don't even have that issue. We have just those people migrating directly into our social security system. They're not even going into our low-skilled labor positions or low-wage positions because they don't have to. They're not stupid. If you receive 560 euros per month and per child also 500 euros, and you receive your rent paid and your electricity bills paid, why should you work? Doesn't make sense. Yeah, and I'm not even blaming those people because they're just doing what they think is better for their lives, and blaming the government, which has allowed all of this. So, and obviously, we haven't solved our pension problem. The German taxpayers are now paying over 100 billion euros each year into the pension system to keep it afloat from taxes. In addition to the social security and pension payments you make on your income wage or on your wage bill, basically, on top of that, which is already 20%. So they haven't solved that problem. They haven't solved the skilled labor problem. They haven't contributed in any way. And that's not even talking about the thousands of cases of, and it's very sad to talk about, it's hard for me to talk about, of young children being raped, women being raped, people being cut down with knives across German cities. Something which you cannot weigh up in any kind of economic benefit which we should receive. So that's why I'm saying it has been the largest attack on Germany since 1945. And this Verschaffen, it has been an absolute treason on German interests, on German people.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just had one finishing question. You mentioned earlier that you think the EU will break up, and again, there seems to be a legitimacy crisis across Europe. That is, they, well, look, they got Le Pen, took her out of the race when she became
Yeah.
most popular. In Hungary, they're accusing the EU of planning to have Orban removed, and of course, AfD, they're talking about banning it. And indeed, the only legitimate people are considered to be legitimate leaders, be it Merz, Macron, Starmer. They're widely unpopular, and people don't actually support them. In addition, we have the von der Leyens and Callas, the unelected group. So, given that this is the situation, why do you, or how do you predict a possible breaking up of the European Union? Will it be because of the economic issue, political legitimacy, or how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, well, I think it's again a conglomeration of all of those factors. It will be to a large extent, it will be decided in the portmonnaies of the people and the bank accounts, because what we have been seeing now in Germany is just flowers against what we will see in the future. For example, in 2027, carbon pricing will rise. So the carbon pricing on the carbon tax on petrol, on heating, it will rise by when the carbon tax is now at 55 euros per ton of carbon, it will rise to 245 euros per ton of carbon. So by a factor of several times. And this is a consensus forecast by seven research institutes, because of the changing of the ETS one of the national carbon pricing to the European carbon pricing system. So anyway, this will make everything more expensive: driving, heating, by going to groceries, buying groceries in the supermarket, everything, because everything is based on obviously energy. And all those new bureaucracy laws, for example, energy efficiency regulation by the European Union, heating regulations in the European Union, how you can build and not build your house, and so on, eco-friendly. All those major regulations will come into effect by the late 2020s and early 2030s. The ban on combustion engines is an obvious example of that. So we will feel those effects. The citizens will feel those economic effects by the late 2020s, early 2030s, and it will be a burden so high that that there will be an issue with that. And also the new debt being taken up, which will have to be repaid. Also, the Corona Fund will have to be repaid by 2028, and so this will all be felt by European citizens economically. De-industrialization will have a kickback, of course, to all the people which, because one industrial worker doesn't only, when he owns his wages, he doesn't only earn for himself and his family, but he pays for the groceries. He goes to the bakery. He has a car and so on. So this will have a triple down effect on the whole economy. Each industrial worker we are losing in Germany, we're losing hundreds and thousands in each year. So this will have a major crisis effect in the near future. Then, of course, mass immigration, where you have regions in Western Germany where 30-40% are foreigners, speak Arabic, don't speak German. This will have major effects on people and waking up. And then the third part of obviously is this legitimacy disappearance, because one thing is when the European elites, European media, they criticize Putin or Xi Jinping of being autocrats and so on, because that was something far away. A lot of people never have been to China, never have been to Russia, or maybe have been to Russia in the 1990s or during the Soviet Union maybe. They haven't seen modern Russia, they haven't seen modern China. But now they're seeing what is being lied to them in the media or by the established politicians, and seeing how that doesn't make sense what they see in real life. So they're being told, the AfD, they're all Nazis, they're all anti-democrats, they want to make a coup d'etat. And then 26% of the people, so more than a quarter of the population, is now voting for the AfD, and everyone already knows someone who has voted the AfD, and they say, hey, well, I know him like for 30 years, he's not a Nazi, so that doesn't compute again. Corona has a major issue for waking a lot of people who were not part of this renaissance of have not been right-wingers and so on, or conservatives. A lot of people have been woken up through Corona. Now a lot of people have woken up through the Ukraine war and the propaganda on that. And I think now the next issues we will see in the future, this kind of like parties being banned, or politicians being denied from participating and being elected and so on. And people seeing them and hearing what they're saying and seeing that that's not something radical. That's absolutely right what they're saying. For just one last example, maybe, all the reports by the German internal security agency, the Verfassungsschutz, which is labeling AfD as allegedly right-wing extremists. All those reports, if you have read them, and some people have read them because the conservative media, some of them even of the larger media outlets, they have published those reports. And if you read them, you know that it's absolutely laughable, because when you read them, you say to yourself, well, what they're saying is absolutely true. Of course, the migration is a major problem. And of course, there are people being killed by knives. And of course, with the green policies leading us to industrialization, what is radical in that? It's just the truth. And so as more and more people see this discrepancy between what they're being told and what is going on around them, more and more people will wake up. So I am pessimistic in the sense that we will have some very hard times coming to the European Union in the near future, in the 2020s and 2030s. Very hard times. And I'm not, maybe even civil war, unfortunately. You have a lot of researchers which are predicting that. But also you have the chance for a renewal, because a lot of people will finally wake up. Again, I want to state for the people who are listening from the internal security service to me, I'm not in favor of this scenario. I'm just saying if the elites will continue with this policy, there will be no other scenario in the future than that. People will wake up, and hopefully we will have a peaceful transition to a new European community, if the majority of governments will be right-wing conservative in Europe and will be able to enact a reform of the European community.
Well, it's a bit sad you had to add if the security agencies are listening. It's
Yes,
it
they
will,
are, obviously.
yeah, no, I mean, it is a different reality now emerging across Europe when the political establishment, if they feel that their legitimacy or declining legitimacy requires the assistance of intelligence agencies. And I guess that's what happened to AfD by labeling it an extremist organization, the largest political party. This allows the intelligence agencies to be used against not just the leaders, but also the members and people who vote for the party. So anyways, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much.